I need to tell you something I've kept hidden for years. It's hard to admit, even now at 62, that I spent 3 years of my life trapped in a nightmare that looked like a fairy tale from the outside. My husband was a retired high school principal. Everyone in our neighborhood thought we were the perfect second-chance couple. But behind our colonial-style home's closed doors, he controlled every breath I took. Until the day I collapsed in our kitchen, and he rushed me to the emergency room claiming I'd tripped over our dog. That's when his carefully constructed lies began to crumble, because the doctor asked me one simple question when he left the room. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Margaret, though everyone calls me Maggie. I was 58 when I met Robert at a grief support group in Portland, Maine. My first husband, Tom, had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier after 35 years of marriage. Our 3 children were grown with families of their own, and the house felt impossibly empty. I'd wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. Robert seemed like an answer to prayers I was afraid to say out loud. He was 64, widowed for 4 years, distinguished-looking with silver hair and these gentle hazel eyes. He'd been a high school principal for 30 years. He spoke softly, listened carefully, and when he talked about his late wife Susan, his voice carried the same ache I felt. We started meeting for coffee after the support group meetings. He'd tell me about his daughter in Seattle and his grandchildren. I'd share stories about my kids, scattered across New England. He never rushed me, never pushed, just offered this steady, calming presence that made the grief feel less suffocating. After 6 months, he asked me to dinner. A real date, he called it, not just coffee between friends. I remember feeling guilty, like I was betraying Tom's memory. But my oldest daughter, Jennifer, had been gently suggesting I try to move forward with my life. The courtship felt like something from another era. Robert brought me flowers every Friday. He opened car doors. He planned thoughtful dates to art galleries and quiet restaurants where we could talk for hours. He told me I was beautiful, even when I felt like a 8-year-old widow who'd forgotten how to exist as anything else. When he proposed after a year, it felt right, safe. My children had met him several times. They liked how respectful he was, how he never tried to replace their father but simply wanted to be part of my life going forward. We had a small ceremony at the courthouse, followed by dinner with our families. I sold my house and moved into his place, a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood with maple trees lining the street. He'd lived there with Susan, but he insisted we redecorate together to make it ours. I should have noticed how he'd suggest we keep most of his furniture, his color choices, his routines, but I chalked it up to him being set in his ways after so many years. I was trying to be accommodating, to not disrupt his life too much. The first few months were fine. Good, even. We'd cook dinner together, watch old movies, take walks around the neighborhood. His daughter called every Sunday, and he'd talk to his grandchildren with such warmth. My kids would visit, and Robert played the gracious host. The changes started small, so small I didn't recognize them as changes at all. One evening, I mentioned wanting to sign up for a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try, now that I finally had time. Robert looked up from his newspaper. "A painting class?" he said, his tone pleasant but with something underneath I couldn't quite identify. "Don't you think that's a bit frivolous? We should be careful with money at our age." I pointed out the class was only $60 for 6 weeks. We were both comfortable financially, our pensions and savings providing more than enough. He set down his newspaper. "Margaret, I just think at our stage of life, we should focus on practical things. Besides, wouldn't you rather spend that time here at home? I thought you enjoyed our quiet evenings." I did enjoy our evenings, but I also wanted something of my own. Still, I didn't push it. I told myself he was probably right. We were trying to build a life together. I could paint at home if I really wanted to. The next week, my daughter Jennifer called to invite us to her daughter Emma's soccer game. I mentioned it to Robert over dinner. "This Saturday?" he frowned. "But Saturday is when we do our grocery shopping and meal prep for the week. You know, I like to keep our schedule consistent. We could do it Friday instead," I suggested. "Or Sunday." His jaw tightened slightly. "I thought we agreed that structure was important. That's what makes a household run smoothly. I had structure with Susan for 40 years, and it worked perfectly." There it was again, that comparison to Susan. I'd heard it before, little comments here and there. How Susan always had his coffee ready at exactly 6:30. How she never minded staying home. How she understood the importance of routine. I went to Emma's game anyway. Robert said he had a headache and stayed home. When I returned, he was watching television in the den. He didn't ask about the game, didn't say hello. When I tried to tell him how Emma had scored a goal, he turned up the volume on the TV. This became the pattern. If I did something he didn't approve of, he'd go silent. Not angry, just absent. He'd be polite but distant, answering in one-word responses until I felt like I was walking around a stranger in my own home. The silence would stretch for days sometimes, until I'd apologize, though I was never quite sure what I was apologizing for. I started declining invitations from my children. It was easier than dealing with Robert's mood afterward. I told myself I was being considerate, that compromise was part of marriage. Then came the comments about my appearance. We were getting ready for Sunday service when he looked at me and sighed. "Are you wearing that dress?" I looked down at my navy dress. I'd worn it dozens of times. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing, I suppose. It's just..." Susan always took such pride in her appearance. She'd never go to church looking so casual. Casual? It was a perfectly respectable dress. But I went back upstairs and changed again, and again, until he finally nodded his approval at a suit I'd worn to my first husband's funeral. He started commenting on my cooking. Tom and I had shared kitchen duties, and I'd never been much of a chef, but I could make decent meals. Robert would take a bite of dinner and set down his fork. "Is something wrong?" I'd ask. No, it's fine. Just different from how Susan made pot roast. She had this special technique. Or, "The chicken's a bit dry, but that's okay." Or, "You forgot to salt the water for the pasta again." I bought cookbooks. I watched YouTube videos. I'd spend hours in the kitchen trying to get things just right. Half the time, he'd barely touch his plate. The other half, he'd eat in silence, never saying if it was good or bad. My friend Barbara from the grief support group called one afternoon. We hadn't talked in months. She wanted to grab lunch. "I'd love to," I said, genuinely happy to hear from her. When I mentioned it to Robert that evening, he set down the book he was reading. "Barbara? The one who was having problems with her adult son?" "Yes, but don't you think it's a bit negative, spending time with people who are always dwelling on their problems? We've moved on from grief group. We should move on from those relationships too." "She's my friend, Robert." His expression hardened. "I just think you should be more careful about who you associate with. At our age, we should surround ourselves with positive influences, but do what you want, you always do anyway." That last line stung. I didn't always do what I wanted. I'd given up painting classes. I barely saw my children. I'd stopped going to book club. I was home every single day, cooking meals that were never quite right, wearing clothes that were never quite appropriate, trying to be a woman I didn't know how to be. But I canceled lunch with Barbara, and when she called again a few weeks later, I didn't answer. Eventually, she stopped calling. My daughter Jennifer noticed I was different. She'd call, and I'd keep the conversations short, aware of Robert in the next room. She invited me to go shopping one weekend, just the two of us. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "Robert and I have plans." "What plans?" "Mom, we haven't spent time alone together in over a year." "I know, honey. It's just, he likes when I'm here." There was a pause. "Mom, are you okay?" "Of course I'm okay. Why wouldn't I be? You just seem, I don't know, smaller somehow." I laughed it off, but her words haunted me. Smaller, is that what I'd become? The real trouble started on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd been cleaning out the spare bedroom and found some old photos of Tom and me with the kids when they were young. I stood there holding a picture of our vacation to Cape Cod, crying for the first time in months. Not sad crying, exactly. Just missing that version of myself who smiled so easily. Robert came home and found me like that. I quickly wiped my eyes, but he'd seen. "Still crying over him?" His voice was cold. "It's been how many years now? 4? I just found some old photos." It caught me off guard. I put Susan's pictures away after she died. It's not healthy to keep dwelling on the past. Maybe you should do the same. "They're pictures of my children," I said quietly. "And him. I see him in every photo. Do you know how that makes me feel, Margaret? Coming home to find my wife crying over another man?" He wasn't just another man. He was my husband for 35 years, the father of my children. Robert's face flushed. And I'm your husband now. Or doesn't that matter to you? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you never really wanted to be married to me at all. Maybe I'm just a placeholder until you can join him. The cruelty in his voice shocked me. This wasn't the gentle man from Grief Group. This wasn't the person who'd brought me flowers every Friday. I apologized. I put the photos in a box in the garage. I never looked at them again. After that, Robert's moods became more unpredictable. I learned to watch for signs. The way he'd press his lips together when annoyed. How he'd go very still before he was about to say something cruel. The particular silence that meant I'd done something wrong but wouldn't find out what until he was ready to tell me. I stopped calling my children unless Robert was out of the house. Even then, I'd keep it short, always listening for his car in the driveway. When they'd ask to visit, I'd make excuses. Too busy. Not feeling well. Maybe next month. Jennifer started getting suspicious. She'd show up unannounced, and I'd scramble to clean up any evidence that things weren't perfect. Robert would be charming when she was there, solicitous, the model husband, but I could feel his anger afterward, like static electricity in the air. One Saturday morning, I was making breakfast when I dropped an egg. It splattered on the floor, yolk spreading across the tile. Such a small thing, but I froze, heart hammering, waiting for his reaction. Robert looked at the mess, then at me. Really, Margaret? Can't you even make breakfast without creating chaos? It was an accident. It's always an accident with you. Breaking dishes, burning food, forgetting things. Susan ran this household like clockwork. But you, he shook his head. You make everything so difficult. Something in me cracked. I'd been making his breakfast every morning for 2 years. I'd given up my friends, my hobbies, time with my children. I'd erased Tom from our home. I'd tried on dozens of outfits before church. I'd cooked 100 meals that were never good enough. Then maybe you should have stayed married to Susan, I said. The words were out before I could stop them. For a moment, we both just stared at each other. Then Robert picked up his plate and threw it against the wall. I jumped back as ceramic shattered, scrambled eggs sliding down the wallpaper. He'd never done anything like that before. Never raised his voice. Never broken anything. Clean it up, he said, his voice eerily calm. Then he walked out of the kitchen. I stood there shaking, looking at the broken plate, the ruined breakfast, the mess I'd have to clean up. And I thought, how did I get here? When did this become my life? But I cleaned it up. I always cleaned things up. That's when I started to understand. This wasn't about dropped eggs or overcooked chicken or what dress I wore to church. This was about control. About making me small enough to fit into the space he designated for me. About replacing who I was with who he wanted me to be. Still, I stayed. Because where would I go? Crawl back to my children and admit I'd made a mistake? Move into some apartment alone at 60? Start over again? For the 3rd time in my life? And part of me, despite everything, still remembered the man who'd brought me flowers, who'd held my hand at Grief Group, who'd promised we'd grow old together. I kept thinking that man would come back. That if I just tried harder, was more careful, did things right, he'd be the Robert I fell in love with again. I didn't know it was about to get so much worse. It was a Thursday evening, almost 3 years into our marriage. I'd made pot roast, carefully following Susan's recipe that I'd found in a box in the attic. I'd set the table with the good china. I'd even worn the blouse Robert had complimented once, months ago. He came home late without calling. The pot roast had dried out from sitting too long in the oven. When he walked in, I was close to tears from stress and frustration. Dinner's ready, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I made pot roast. He didn't even look at me. Just hung up his coat and walked past to the den. Robert, dinner? I'm not hungry. I had a late lunch. A late lunch. He couldn't have called to tell me that before I'd spent 3 hours cooking, before I'd stressed over getting everything perfect. You could have let me know, I said, following him to the den. He turned to face me, and something in his expression made my blood run cold. Are you seriously giving me attitude right now? After the day I've had? I'm not giving you attitude. I just wish you'd communicate with me. Communicate? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's rich. Coming from you. You can't even have a simple conversation without bringing up problems. Always complaining, always dissatisfied, just like you're doing right now. I'm not complaining. I made dinner and you didn't. There it is again. Do you hear yourself? Nagging, constantly nagging. Susan never acted like this. She understood that a man needs peace when he comes home. But you ambush me the second I walk through the door. My hands were shaking. I didn't ambush you. I just... Stop talking. His voice was quiet but firm. I don't want to hear another word from you tonight. Not one word. He turned back to his newspaper. I stood there for a moment, then went back to the kitchen. I put the pot roast in containers. I washed the good china. I cleaned everything up, moving as quietly as possible. Around 9, I went upstairs to bed. Robert stayed in the den. I lay there in the dark, wondering what had just happened. Wondering how a simple dinner had turned into this. He didn't come to bed that night. Or the next. He started sleeping in the guest room. And during the day, he'd barely acknowledge my presence. When I'd try to apologize, he'd hold up his hand. I'm not ready to talk to you yet. This went on for a week of silence so thick it felt like drowning. I'd try to start conversations, and he'd look right through me. I'd cook his meals, and he'd eat them without comment, then leave the dishes on the table for me to clean. I was a ghost in my own home. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I found him in the study one evening. Robert, please. We need to talk about this. I'm sorry about the pot roast. I'm sorry I complained. I'm sorry for whatever I did. Just please stop shutting me out. He looked at me for a long moment. You want to fix this? Yes. Please. Then you need to understand something, Margaret. I gave you a good life, a beautiful home, financial security. All I ask is that you respect me, that you stop being so difficult all the time. Can you do that? I nodded, even though some part of me recognized how wrong this was, how twisted the logic. But I was so tired of the silence, so desperate for things to go back to normal. I'll try harder, I whispered. Good. Then we'll move past this. And just like that, he smiled. He reached for my hand. He was the Robert from Grief Group again, gentle and kind. That night, he came back to our bedroom. We lay in the dark, and he told me he loved me, that he knew we could make this work. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt terrified, because I'd just learned a new truth. Robert controlled not just my actions, but my access to his affection. Be good, and he'd love me. Step out of line, and he'd withdraw, leaving me in emotional exile until I apologized for sins I couldn't even name. This became the pattern for the next 6 months. I'd do something wrong, often without knowing what. He'd freeze me out for days or weeks. I'd exhaust myself trying to fix it, trying to be better. And eventually, he'd forgive me, and I'd be so grateful for those crumbs of kindness that I'd try even harder to avoid upsetting him again. My children rarely heard from me. When they'd call, I'd make excuses about why I couldn't talk. They stopped inviting me to things. What was the point? I always said no anyway. I stopped leaving the house except for groceries and church. Robert didn't ask me to stay home. He didn't have to. I'd learned that the cost of going out was too high. Better to stay in my cage with the door open than fly away and face his displeasure when I returned. I lost weight. Not deliberately, but stress killed my appetite. And Robert's comments about my cooking meant I barely ate at meals anyway. My clothes hung loose. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Jennifer's word came back to me. Smaller. Then came the night everything changed. It was late September. I'd made chicken for dinner, using a recipe from one of Susan's cookbooks. Robert took one bite and pushed his plate away. It's raw in the middle. I looked at the chicken. It wasn't raw. Maybe slightly pink near the bone, but it had been cooked properly. I used a thermometer. It reached 165 degrees. Are you arguing with me? His voice was quiet. Dangerous. No, You're telling me I'm wrong? That I don't know what raw chicken looks like? That's not what I meant. He stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward. I am so sick of this. So sick of your incompetence. Do you know what it's like, coming home every day to this? To you? Robert, please. You want to know the truth, Margaret? The truth is, you're a disappointment. A constant, daily disappointment. I thought you'd be different. I thought after Tom, you'd be grateful to have someone take care of you. But instead, you're just useless. Each word was like a slap. I felt tears starting, which only made me angry at myself. Don't cry. Don't give him that satisfaction. I'm doing my best, I managed. Your best? He laughed. Your best is burned dinners and a messy house and constant complaining. Your best is isolating yourself from everyone because you can't even maintain basic relationships. Your best is being so needy and pathetic that your own children barely call anymore. That's because I stopped myself, but too late. Because I what? He stepped closer. Say it. Because I what? I took a step back. I'd never been physically afraid of him before, but something in his eyes made my survival instincts kick in. Because I finally showed you what kind of person you really are, he finished for me. Weak, difficult, not half the woman Susan was. I'm not Susan, I said quietly. I never will be Susan. You're damn right about that. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. I thought he was leaving, going to cool off somewhere, and relief flooded through me. But instead, he stopped at the kitchen counter. You know what Susan would do right now? He picked up the ceramic bowl I'd used to mix the chicken marinade. She'd take responsibility. She'd apologize. She'd do better. I'm sorry. Too late. He threw the bowl. Not at me, but at the wall next to my head. It exploded in a shower of ceramic shards. I screamed and dropped to the floor, hands over my head. When I looked up, Robert was standing over me. His face was flushed, but his voice was eerily calm. See what you made me do? This is what happens when you push someone too far, Margaret. Then he stepped over me and walked out of the kitchen. A moment later, I heard the front door slam. I sat on the floor, surrounded by broken ceramic, chicken marinade dripping down the wall, shaking so hard I couldn't stand. He hadn't hit me. He hadn't touched me at all. But I was more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. Because I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't going to get better, that the man I'd married was never coming back, that I had to get out. But how? Where would I go? What would I tell people? That my husband threw a bowl at the wall? That he called me useless? Would anyone even believe me? We looked like such a normal couple. Robert was respected in the community. And I'd cut myself off from everyone who might help me. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough for the adrenaline to fade into this hollow, empty feeling. Finally, I got up. I cleaned up the broken bowl. I wiped the marinade off the wall. I threw away the chicken. I did all of this mechanically, my mind somewhere far away. Robert came home after midnight. I was in bed, pretending to sleep. He didn't come to the bedroom. I heard him downstairs for a while, then silence. In the morning, there was a note on the kitchen counter. Sorry about last night. I shouldn't have lost my temper. Let's forget it happened. Let's forget it happened. As if 3 years of psychological abuse could be forgotten. As if the pattern would suddenly break because he'd written an apology on a sticky note. I made his breakfast. I didn't know what else to do. When he came downstairs, he kissed the top of my head like nothing had changed. Good morning, darling. Is that coffee I smell? We went through the motions of our normal morning routine. He read the paper. I cleaned up the kitchen. He commented on the weather. I agreed it was nice. We were performing normalcy. And I was so tired of pretending. That night, I lay in bed after Robert fell asleep. I thought about calling Jennifer, but what would I say? Your new stepfather is mean to me? It sounded childish even in my own head. He'd never hit me. He just controlled everything, criticized everything, withdrew his affection to punish me. Was that even abuse? Or was I just being too sensitive? Like he said. 3 more weeks passed. Robert was on his best behavior, bringing me flowers, suggesting we watch my favorite movies. I went through the motions, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. That bowl smashing against the wall had broken something else too. My belief that this could work. I started having panic attacks. My heart would race for no reason. I'd wake up gasping in the middle of the night. I felt dizzy constantly, like the world was tilting. One morning, I was making breakfast when the room started spinning. I grabbed the counter, but my legs gave out. The last thing I remember was the cold tile floor rushing up to meet me. When I came to, Robert was leaning over me, his face pale. "Margaret? Margaret, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick. Everything hurt. "Don't move. I'm calling 911. He had his phone out, already dialing. For a moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. For a moment, he was the Robert I'd thought I married. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics asking questions. Robert explaining I'd just collapsed, that I'd been stressed lately, that he was worried about me, playing the concerned husband perfectly. At the emergency room, they ran tests. Blood pressure through the roof. Heart racing. Dehydrated. Malnourished. The doctor looked at my chart with concern. "Mrs. Patterson, when's the last time you had a physical?" I couldn't remember. "Maybe 2 years ago?" She examined me more carefully. I was wearing a short-sleeved gown, and I saw her pause at the bruise on my upper arm. I'd forgotten about that. Robert had grabbed me too hard a few days ago when I'd tried to walk away from an argument. "How did you get this bruise?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "I don't remember. Maybe I bumped into something?" She made a note. Then she did something that changed everything. She looked at Robert, who'd been hovering by the door, and said, "Sir, I need to examine your wife privately now. If you could wait in the hall?" Robert's jaw tightened, but he couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. "Of course. I'll just be outside." The moment the door closed, the doctor moved her chair closer to my bed. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you safe at home?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Are you safe at home? No one had asked me that. Not in 3 years. Not once. I opened my mouth to lie, to say of course I was safe, to protect Robert's reputation and my own embarrassment, but what came out instead was a sob, and then I couldn't stop crying. The doctor handed me tissues and waited. She didn't rush me, didn't tell me to calm down, just sat there while 3 years of pain poured out of me. "He doesn't hit me," I finally managed. He says things. He makes me feel like I can't do anything right. He won't talk to me for weeks if I upset him, and I don't even know what I'm doing wrong most of the time. And the other night, he threw a bowl at the wall, and I thought next time. My voice broke. The doctor squeezed my hand. "That is abuse, Margaret. What you're describing is emotional and psychological abuse, and it often escalates to physical violence. But I'm not some young woman trapped with nowhere to go. I'm 60 years old. I was married before. I should have known better." Abuse doesn't discriminate by age, and abusers are often very good at making their victims feel like everything is their fault. That's part of the pattern. I don't know what to do. First, we're going to keep you here overnight for observation. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you're severely dehydrated. We need to get you stable. Then, we're going to connect you with a social worker who specializes in domestic violence. She can help you understand your options. He'll be so angry that I told you. He doesn't have to know what we discussed. I can say I'm keeping you for observation because of your blood pressure. Which is true. When Robert came back in, the doctor explained, in medical terms, that I needed to stay overnight. He nodded, playing the worried husband again. Of course, whatever's best for Margaret. After he left, the social worker came. Her name was Lisa, and she was maybe 40, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Dr. Chen filled me in," she said. "I want you to know you have options. You're not trapped." "My children don't even know," I said. "I've barely talked to them in 2 years. They probably think I chose him over them. That's part of the isolation tactic. He separated you from your support system so you'd feel like you had nowhere to turn, but your children love you, and when you're ready, they'll want to help." Lisa gave me pamphlets about domestic violence, warning signs I hadn't recognized as warning signs. She gave me the number for a hotline. She explained what a safety plan was. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she said, "but start thinking about what you want your life to look like. Not what Robert wants, what you want." That night, alone in my hospital bed, I thought about that question. What did I want? I wanted to see my grandchildren without asking permission. I wanted to call my daughters without keeping one ear open for Robert's car. I wanted to cook dinner without fear. I wanted to wear what I wanted, go where I wanted, be friends with who I wanted. I wanted to stop feeling small. I wanted my life back. In the morning, they discharged me. Robert picked me up, all concern and gentle touches. On the drive home, he kept asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I was comfortable. I gave one-word answers. I was thinking about what Lisa had said, about safety plans, about options. Over the next 2 weeks, I started laying groundwork. Carefully, very carefully. I called Jennifer from the grocery store. "Mom, is everything okay? You sound strange." "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice shaking. "But I need you to listen without interrupting." I told her everything. 3 years of control and criticism and punishment, the bowl, the collapse, the doctor's question, "Are you safe at home?" Jennifer was crying by the end. "Mom, why didn't you tell us? We would have helped." He made me feel like I was crazy, like I was the problem. "You're not the problem, he is, and you're coming home with me, today, right now." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. I'm coming to get you. Pack a bag with your important documents. I'll be there in an hour." "Jennifer." "Mom, please, let us help you." An hour later, while Robert was at his Lions Club meeting, Jennifer pulled into the driveway with my son Thomas. They'd driven from Boston together. They helped me pack my clothes, my documents, my medications. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Robert, I'm leaving. Please don't try to contact me. My lawyer will be in touch." I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I just left. The next few months were hard. Robert called constantly at first, leaving voicemails that alternated between apologetic and angry, begging me to come home, then accusing me of abandoning him, then telling me I'd never survive on my own. My attorney filed for divorce. Robert contested it, claimed I was having a breakdown, that I needed help, but Dr. Chen provided documentation. Lisa gave testimony about our conversations. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. The divorce took 8 months. Robert fought every step of the way, but in the end, I got the house I'd sold when we married. He kept his house. We split our finances. The marriage was dissolved. I'm 62 now. It's been almost a year since I left. I live in a small condo near Jennifer and her family. I see my grandchildren every week. I joined a painting class and discovered I love it. I met Barbara for lunch last month, and she didn't even hesitate to forgive me for vanishing. I still have panic attacks sometimes, still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I've done something wrong, still have to remind myself that I don't need permission to live my own life. But I'm healing. I go to therapy every week. I've joined a support group for women who've experienced domestic abuse. I'm learning that what happened to me wasn't my fault. That emotional abuse is real abuse. That leaving wasn't cowardice, it was courage. If you're reading this, and any of it sounds familiar, please listen to me. You're not crazy, you're not too sensitive, you're not the problem, and you're not alone. Emotional abuse is real. It's insidious, because there are no visible bruises, but the damage is just as real. If someone makes you feel small, controls your relationships, punishes you with silence, criticizes everything you do, isolates you from people who love you, that is abuse. You deserve better. You deserve to feel safe in your own home. You deserve to be loved without conditions, without criticism, without fear. And you can leave. I know it feels impossible. I know you've been told no one will believe you, that you have nowhere to go, that you can't make it on your own. Those are all lies designed to keep you trapped. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. They have resources. They can help you make a safety plan. They understand. Tell someone you trust. A friend, a family member, a doctor, anyone. Break the silence that keeps you imprisoned. Document everything. Save texts. Record incidents. Take photos. Not because you're planning to leave, but because if you decide to, you'll need evidence. And know this, your abuser will not change. No matter how many times they apologize, no matter how many flowers they bring, no matter how convincing they are during the good periods, the pattern will continue and it will escalate. I'm one of the lucky ones. I got out before it turned physical, though the doctor told me it was only a matter of time. I had resources and family support. Not everyone does. But if I could leave at 60, after 3 years of systematic psychological abuse, after being convinced I was the problem, after cutting myself off from everyone who loved me, then you can too. Whatever your circumstances, there is a way out. You are stronger than you know. You are worthy of love and respect. You are not alone. And there is life after abuse. A good life. A life where you don't walk on eggshells, where you can breathe freely, where you can be yourself. Please, if you need help, reach out. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait for it to get better, because it won't. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be free. You deserve